Thunder raged outside the tower, but a similar thunder raged inside Ning as well when he heard what the system had said. What do you mean I can afford to take some time? And what was that about time being relative? Ning asked as hope brewed inside him that he thought would only bring his disappointment if he said it out loud. The hope only continued growing bigger and bigger. By now, Ning could understand what the system was trying to say, albeit he didn't understand why what it said was happening. So, he took a deep breath and asked, "How many years has it been in Kumiya since I left?" Ning had until now based all bits of information he got from Kumiya on his own time. In the last 300 or so years, Ili had advanced exactly 4 more times, reaching spirit transformation's 5th realm. If she did access the origin constantly, she should have been a lot higher in cultivation base. After all, Ning had managed to go up in cultivation in just a matter of years because of how dense it all was. That was why he had assumed that she was likely not focusing on cultivation at all. However, if what he thought were true, he desperately waited for the system to answer. The system, almost dramatically, took some time before answering. When it did, Ning's heart nearly stopped from the shock. 58.2 years 58 years. That was all the time that had passed in Kumiya. To a cultivator, especially one so high in cultivation, that sort of time was nothing. Going up 4 spirit transformation realms in less than 60 years made perfect sense. It was fast by normal standards, given how long nascent souls took to cultivate. However, the origin of Kumiya couldn't be compared to the other random locations on the planet. It was a difference between heaven and earth. Now that he did learn about this, Ning asked the reason behind this time difference. Why has such little time passed there, system? You said it was because we were in a different galaxy, but how does that work? He asked. He had all but forgotten about the rain outside his window. No, he had forgotten about it. He simply waited for the system to start speaking again. Ning didn't understand why mass affected time. He didn't need to. All he needed to know was that he had time and could go back to see his loved ones without having to wait very long. You should have let me know about this earlier, soothe my inner turmoils, Ning said, but the system didn't respond. Ning didn't care if it did. He just thought about how long he had before he could reach back. At 5 times the slowness, if I wanted to reach Kumiya within 1,000 years, I have 5,000 years. That's pretty long, even for me, Ning thought. He was getting more and more hopeful that he would actually make it back in time. At least, back before they all either died or the worst scenario, lived long enough to stop caring about him. He had never wanted to go back to a Kumiya where Ili, Anya, and the rest didn't care about him. 10,000 years, he said to himself. I have 10,000 years to return back to Kumiya. That should be about 2,000 years for them, which I hope they can wait for. The system chimed in right as Ning finished speaking. Ning frowned once again. What is the flaw? He asked. Oh. Ning said with his hands on the chin. He hadn't thought about that. That's right. Other galaxies won't move at the same rate, he thought. He would have to go through 5 galaxies to reach Kumiya. He was already on 1, then 3 more in the way, and finally the last one where Kumiya was located. Since Kumiya was in the 5th galaxy on the way, Ning didn't think the time difference there would be significant enough to factor into his calculations, but the others. The other 3 galaxies, are they bad for me? Ning asked. Holy, that's quite bad. What about the second one? Ning asked. Oh, then that's better than Vilmore for sure, Ning said. He mulled on the information for a little while. That settles it then, I will have to somehow skip the 1st and the 3rd galaxy on the way back, he said. Of course, what's there not to be sure about? Ning asked. Ning frowned. The 3rd galaxy especially made perfect sense to skip, but then why was the system asking him this? Why? Ning asked. What's so important about the 3rd galaxy? Earth is on the 3rd galaxy? Ning asked with surprise. Ning had never thought about going back to Earth, but it seemed it was on the way to Kumiya. Would he want to go back now? No, Ning said resolutely. I can't go to Earth right now. I will visit later after I go back and find everyone in Kumiya. It's not like I have any. His parents, or at least, their grave. He wanted to visit that at least if he could. He wanted to meet his parents. His parents. Who were they again? Vague silhouettes of faces appeared on his mind but nothing specific. It had been way too long for him to remember what they looked like. If anything, he had likely forgotten their faces back when he was on Earth itself. Ning shook his head. He couldn't think about that for now. System, put my memories of Earth into the auto-buy behind talent, he said. He could get them immediately as it wouldn't cost much, but he didn't want to deal with that at the moment. He thought about something the system mentioned for a while and asked, how long has it been since I left Earth, in terms of Earth time? 6 years, 2 months, and 10 days. What the, huh? Ning couldn't help but shout out loud. It had been almost 3,000 years since he left Earth, and it had only been 6 years? He found it a little hard to believe. What was the time difference again? 1 to 365, he asked. 1 to 387 at the moment and increasing. Why the hell is there such a difference? Ning asked. Is the galaxy Earth in that massive? Then why? Ning asked. If the mass was smaller, shouldn't time have moved faster there? The system was somehow contradicting its own words. Something else? What is something else? Ning asked curiously. Ning didn't think for a while. Universes colliding with each other, what was there to think about? He nodded to himself for a few seconds and finally said, wait, what? What the fuck? Universes colliding. If that happens, won't we all die? Ning asked. I know, I meant we, as in the entire population of the universe, Ning shouted. Huh? So they are colliding, but just a bit? Ning asked. How does that work? Ning asked. All right, never mind then, Ning said. Damn, universe colliding. What sort of catastrophic event is that? He wondered. Oh right, do you know when it will happen? Ning asked. Oh, Ning said. That was a lot of time. Humanity would all die by then for sure or move on to the stars and hopefully the other galaxies. 100,000 years is a lot of time. He stopped speaking. Suddenly, a thought crossed his mind. The system didn't specify the location of the time. System, he asked. When you say 100,000 years, what galaxy are you basing that time off of? Ning sighed. In other words, how long before this other universe collides with Earth in Earth's time? Ning asked. That's so close, Ning thought to himself. Well, shit, Ning thought. He didn't know what else to think. The system was right. Just learning about these things was hard enough to absorb. Learning how universes worked in a multiverse would surely be worse for him. He closed his eyes and slumped back on the sofa for a bit as the wind and thunder raged in the storm outside. Rain continuously hit the window in his room, reminding him of what was happening outside. After a bit of contemplation, he finally opened his eyes. I would love to visit Earth, but I can't wait around to watch the universe collide. I need to go visit my people first and foremost, he thought. That's right. After I rejoin with them, I am free to do whatever I want, he thought. Thinking about Kumiya and the others there, Ning felt happy. No, he felt excited. He couldn't wait to get back to them, and then go roam the stars as he pleased. Until then, they would have to wait a bit. Not long, just a bit. A smile appeared on Ning's face as he saw the rain and thunder stop outside. He had been lost in his mind for a long while. Learning about all these things had been straining, but now, he felt relieved. So, he smiled. He turned around to look at the clock near his bed. It was about the same time as when the schedule told him to wake up. Right, he thought. Let's forget about everything not related to Vilmore for now. I should go get something to eat before I go train, he said out loud. It's going to be a long day. Ning hadn't realized how correct his words would be when he had said that it would be a long day. Fighting continuously throughout the day for 13 hours was not something he liked very much. He would have likely not minded it if there was some training involved, but no, there was none. It was all just fighting. To Mercy, who was his main opponent, fighting was training. From time to time when he used a weird skill or did something that impressed Mercy, she would come up to him and ask him to teach her. But with a few words of teaching, she would get bored and ask him to fight again. I learn better when I'm fighting, she had said. Mercy, unlike her sister, wasn't a dual awakener. Just an enchanter. Still, that knowledge didn't look like it bothered her. Silvers, the old man, was in fact a dual awakener. That wasn't why Mercy had taken him into the squad though. That came from his expertise to create everyday items with ease. The old man's invoker techniques far outranked his enchanter techniques. Ning was curious at first. Why was such an old man in the tower even? So, he had asked, and without hesitation, he had told him his backstory. Silvers was born into a poor household with barely any money to do anything. When he realized that he had some ether abilities, from a young age he started creating things to sell to other people. He was basically scamming them as the items he created would disappear not long after, but he didn't care. he needed to fill his family's stomach, especially his many younger siblings. As such, the old man had gone through this young and teen life without a single free day to do anything but create items and sell them for money. He never got to go to a school either. In fact, he couldn't read at all. Poor guy didn't even have the time to marry a woman. It was only later in his life that he realized that he could enchant as well. However, by that time he was fully invested in invoking and didn't care much for enchanting. Due to the lack of early breakthroughs, by the age of 140, he now looked like an old man, when in fact, he was the youngest of the whole group. However, now that his life was comfortable, he decided to use it to the fullest. Finally, there was Alekor. Ning had a hard time understanding this man's personality. He looked like a carefree guy that would just roam the streets of the capital with his hands tied behind his head. However, he was the most hardworking of everyone in the group, and as of yet, he had been the only one who came close to defeating Ning of the three. Apparently, Alekor was the son of a duke in Losmana, but since he was a second son, he was allowed to join the tower while his brother took over the family. He had been a fantastic enchanter from a young age, taught by some of the greatest amongst them. It was during one of her missions to the Losmana where Marasi had met the duke's son and noticed his eagerness to go out and do something other than sitting at home and rot. So, Marasi told him to join the tower, and when he did, she took him in. The fighting continued for days on end. By now, it had already been 4 days since Ning started this. Although, he wasn't sure if he could even call this fighting now. Fighting had become really simple for him. All he needed to do was the exact opposite of what the enemy was doing, except for some cases. If someone sent something flying towards you, just send that something flying away from you. If someone created a magnet to attract the metals on you, just reverse the polarity of the item that was magnetized. If someone is using gravity to pull, just use reverse gravity to push. There were a few conditions where it didn't work at all. For example, heat energy. If something was getting hot, he couldn't reverse the energy to make something cold. He could only give energy, not take it away. However, he could create something with no energy and have that dissipate away from the heat. However, that took incredible focus and concentration, as something without energy didn't want to exist and would always pull on his ether to fill it. Ning was getting there for sure. He was on the training ground, fighting against Mercy again. Mercy jumped at him with an incredible weight to her whole body. She had increased the gravity on herself, and on the other end of the gravity was Ning. Ning quickly realized that and cancelled the gravity, but Mercy still flew towards him with incredible speed, with her previous momentum. Ning put out his left hand to his side, a tiny black hole appearing near his palm. His body was fully enchanted and stuck firm to the ground, so nothing happened to him at all. However, Mercy's body, which was freely moving through the air, was immediately dragged into it. Creating a black hole, however tiny, cost him a lot of energy, so he stopped using it for more than a second. However, that was enough to throw Mercy off course. Mercy caught herself mid-air, suddenly halting her sudden advancement towards the ground. At the same time, Ning appeared in front of her and flicked her forehead. "I win again," he said. Mercy frowned and pouted. She dropped to the ground and muttered, "Damn it," to herself and left with a pouting face. Ning simply smiled. This was a daily occurrence now. With every loss, Mercy cursed to herself and left to rest for a bit and gather some ether before starting again. A woman walked into the room and said something to Alekor quietly. Alekor thanked her and she left. "Something wrong?" Ning asked when he saw that. "Oh, no, he said. "I just received a message saying Captain's requested potions were ready and we could go pick it up." "Potions? What's this about?" Ning asked involuntarily before remembering the small glass vial that Marasi had fed the Marquise. Which then reminded him of the small glass vial that the Lord had poisoned him with, making his body reduced to a pile of flesh that decayed more and more with every second. He chose to ignore that thought for now. It's Captain's potions, the one she ordered to be made. She had it ordered before going to sleep, and I will have to go pick it up now, Alekor said. "Why don't I go too?" Ning asked. He was curious about where and how these potions were made. After all, he hadn't seen them in any of the other locations he had been to. "Are you sure? It's just a small trip," Alekor said. "Yeah, I'm sure. Besides, it's my break right now," Ning said. "All right, we will leave after Silvers gets back from his patrol," Alekor said. After a while, Silvers returned, and both Alekor and Ning left the tower. Ning had gone out to see the city the last couple of days and had been really surprised by how developed the city was. He had seen it in the day, but at night was when the city finally came to life. With glowing bulbs all around them, people rushing through the big city to do their job gave Ning a sense of urban life that he hadn't yet seen in any other cities. It was no wonder that the Sarian Empire was called the greatest of all the empires. Vehicles of all types rode past Ning and Alekor as they walked along the sidewalk, going to a place 5 blocks west. Along the way, Ning asked some questions like what was the use of potions here and who used these, as well as why it wasn't available in the other regions. Alekor answered it all without any qualms. According to him, potions were newer items that were not yet available on the market. Only the tower was using it now, and that too at the higher members. For now, only squad captains and above were allowed to even own a potion. It was still unsure if potions were entirely healthy or not, or if using them poisoned the body somehow. So, the tower had not been made public to the people yet. Once it was decided that potions were safe, they would surely be sold freely. Ning reached the place and was surprised at how decrepit the location was. It was in the middle of the city, a small building sandwiched between 2 big buildings, and not much maintenance was done on the outside. The stairs leading to the house looked like they would break if a cat jumped on them. Not that it would, given this planet had no cats. Alekor walked up the steps and knocked on the black burnt door of the house and waited. After a while, a little girl about the age of 10 or 25 in Vilmore years opened the door. She was about half of Ning's height, with suspender pants and a white shirt on her. She wore a hat that made her look tomboyish at first, but her long hair quickly gave her gender away. The girl looked at the tall Ning and Alekor with squinting eyes and asked, "How may I help you?" "Hey little girl, is your grandma home?" Alekor asked. The girl nodded and turned around to shout, "Grandma, someone is at the door." "Who is it?" A squeaky voice came from inside the house. "Who are you?" the girl asked back. Alekor smiled and said, "We are men from Supreme Marise's squad." "It's Supreme Marise's people, they say," the little girl shouted back. "Oh, dear," the old woman's voice came from inside the house as she quickly came down running. Ning could hear the stairs creak as the woman made it down them. Finally, he could see the crooked old woman, with thin gray hair, come towards the door with a cane in her hands. "I am so sorry, young man. I did not realize you would come this early," the woman said. "It's all fine, Mrs. Ghani," Alekor said with a smile that made him look like a prince. Being a duke's son, he wasn't that far off. Right. Here," the old woman said as she took out 5 different glass vials all wrapped in paper. Alekor held the glass vials for a bit before putting them in his storage. Ning only needed that one glance to read the texts written on the paper that wrapped the colorful vials. One of them was an antidote that healed more venom and poisons. One of them was a truth serum. Finally, the remaining 3 were healing potions that healed most minor physical injuries such as cuts and burns. Ning was really curious about the content of these vials, while at the same time wondering about something. Was this woman the person who made that vial of poison that nearly killed my other body? He wondered. He was still surprised at how effective that poison was, but he didn't fault her for it. She was likely just doing her job by doing what she was asked. "Thank you, Mrs. Ghani," Alekor said and turned to leave. However, Ning didn't turn around with him. Instead, he asked, "Excuse me, Mrs. Ghani, are you making some potions right now?" The woman looked at Ning with a judging look from top to bottom. "Who might you be?" she asked in her squeaky voice. "My name is Terran Forn, Mr. Ghani. I am one of the subordinates of Lady Marasi. I came here after learning that you make these amazing potions that perform miracles that people with ether cannot perform. I am very fascinated by potions and everything and was hoping you could let me watch the process of how you make everything. If you let me, I will repay you back 100-fold, Ning said. The cure to what his main body was suffering from was likely a potion as well. So, he wanted to now learn how to make it. The old woman named Ghani looked with a confused and suspicious face at Ning. She was about to refuse, just on principle alone, when Alekor spoke before her. "Brother Terran, what are you doing? We should return back to the tower soon," Alekor said. "I really want to learn this, Brother Alekor. I'm fascinated by the prospects of creating something on my own. Besides, I have a 3-hour break right now. I will be back by the time my free time is over," Ning said. Alekor was still about to say something when he remembered something. That's right, he does love creating a lot. Without such a love for something, he could have never created ether, Alekor thought. He couldn't stop Ning now after realizing that. Mrs. Ghani, would you please mind teaching my associate a little about potion making? He is one of the best minds in the entire tower and will surely help you overcome any obstacles you might yourself have on the matters of potion making, Alekor said. Now, the woman couldn't refuse. She didn't know about Ning, but she knew about Alekor. He was the direct subordinate of a supreme and he was likely a great man. Following the same logic, she assumed Ning was a great man too. While she frowned at the thought of having to show her work to a random person who came to her, she wasn't in a place she could refuse. If the young man complained to the tower, and the tower decided to listen to him for some reason, she and her granddaughter would lose the grace of the tower, and would no longer be able to afford anything. Very well, please come in, the old woman said and brought him in. I'll see you later, Alekor, Ning said and walked in. After Alekor left, the little girl in suspenders pushed the door shut and walked in. She looked at Ning curiously and Ning simply returned a gentle smile. Looking at her tomboyish self reminded him of Anya. She too had been dressed up as a boy to gather money and heal her father back in Deep Skull Island in the Scattered Isles. What's your name? Ning asked. Helena Ghani, the little girl said with a hand put forward for a handshake. Ning grabbed her little hand and shook it. I'm Terran Forn, nice to meet you, Helena, he said. The little girl nodded. She then curiously asked, are you an ether expert, Uncle Terran? Uncle? Ning felt a little bad when he heard the word uncle as his current body was only supposed to be around 20 years old, but when he remembered that he was old enough to be called an ancestor, he put the thought away. Yes, I am, he said. What rank? The little girl asked curiously. Hell. Don't bother the honored guest with your questions, the old woman squeaked from in front of the two. She then turned to Ning, gave him a smile, or at least tried, failed, and ended up looking like a stretched raisin, and said, don't mind the little girl, young man. She has been interested in ether arts ever since her teachers told her she could be like you guys someday, please don't mind her. Oh, Ning said. The old woman walked up the stairs slowly with her cane supporting her, and Ning followed behind her as well, equally as slowly. Your teachers checked your ether rank? Ning asked. The girl nodded. They tested us when I was 20 years old and said I'm an ether master. Oh, Ning thought. That was quite talented. Ether master by 8 years old was not a very easy task. Ning used his ether analysis on the little girl and saw her rank, ether master. Has she not advanced at all? Ning thought. Then he used the second level of the analysis, looking at her name. That said, Helena Ghani, but that was not what he really cared for. He went one level deeper and used the third level to see what sort of technique she had been using. Normally, if someone used an absorption technique, it could be seen here. However, Ning didn't see that at all. There was no absorption technique within her. However, there was something else there that surprised him beyond belief. Dual Awakener. That was surprising, to say the least. He hadn't expected a random little girl in a random house would end up being a Dual Awakener. He wondered how many more of such variety had popped up all around the world. He ignored that thought for now and looked back at the little girl. Are you using the absorption technique that has been popping up all around the world? Ning asked. No, the girl said. Grandma says I'm not allowed to use any such thing until she can find me a good teacher. The little girl has no talent, young man, the old woman said from up ahead. The only reason she even managed to reach ether masters was that I fed her the fruits grown deep within the ether forest itself. If not for that, I doubt she would have even awakened herself. The little girl pouted. I am talented. I even help you so much with my ether, she said. Yes, you do, the old woman said, but that little help won't be able to get you into the tower, child. The tower is where the best of the best gather. If you go there, you'll be eaten up like a little chicken in front of an ether beast. The little girl was starting to tear up when Ning said, that's not entirely correct, Mrs. Ghani. The world has changed and absorption techniques are now spread throughout the world. You can buy one for cheap in the stores and learn it yourself. As long as you're awakened and have the slightest bit of talent, you can go far, he said. The little girl's eyes shined bright as her tears vanished into her sleeves. Sigh, please don't give her unnecessary hope. It will only lead to more disappointment, the old woman said, with a hint of disappointment in her own voice. Ning caught that and used his analysis on the old woman. She was an ether grandmaster in the art of enchanting. Why does she sound so defeated though? Ning wondered. He could have opened Omni Analysis to learn a lot more about the woman, but he didn't want to suffer from the mental pain that would give him. The information would never be worth that pain. Finally, they reached a room on the upper floor, and Ning looked at what looked like a kitchen. There were two massive black cauldrons bubbling on top of the two gas stoves, dimly lit by a black, sooted light overhead. In fact, the entire room was black, with seemingly no ventilation in the room. That's not good for oneself, he thought. The woman quickly ran up to the cauldron and started stirring it. Then, with her enchantment, she stirred the other cauldron too. Ning walked a little closer and saw that the cauldron was filled to the brim with water and something floating in there. He wondered what it was. The woman reached into the cupboard and pulled out a giant flat plate that she kept on the counter. Then, she reached into the handle of her cane and pointed it toward the plate. Suddenly, dozens of items appeared out of nowhere, surprising Ning a little. She put her storage gem in the cane? He thought in surprise. The little girl walked up to the grandma and jumped onto the counter before sitting down in front of the items and separating them into a bunch. Once everything was separated, Ning finally looked at them. At first, it was hard to tell what they were. Those things weren't the easiest to guess. Not to mention, Ning wasn't really knowledgeable about the flora and fauna of this place. Ning could see some leaves, some branches, some stalks of grass, some dried fruits, some raw fruit, some ripe ones, some flowers of various colors. And finally, perhaps the most shocking, bones and meats. Bones and meats of what? He wondered and got a little closer. He couldn't tell what they were from just looking at them, but the purple lines passing through them did give him an idea. Ether beasts, he thought. Those were ether beasts' meats and bones for sure. Have they learned how to use the body of an ether beast? Ning wondered. There were still many different things about the ether beasts and the vegetation in the ether forest that he didn't know about. In fact, the humanity of this planet seemed to be only tapping into the potential from the usage of those beasts. The previous emperor of Xandria had managed to figure out that eating the gems of the beasts made you stronger. And now, this woman had somehow figured out how to use them in the potion. As he watched, the woman started cutting the ingredients, measured them on a cup or a measuring spring, and tossed them into the boiling water. Flour and leaves she would toss without doing anything, fruits and meats she would cut into small chunks, and for barks, roots, and bones, she would crush into tiny powder before tossing it into the water. Once she put in the necessary ingredients, she started stirring again. The little girl watched from the countertop, with her hands supporting her head, while her grandma kept on stirring. "Do you want me to help you stir, Mrs. Ghani?" Ning asked. Watching an old woman and a little girl work, while he stood and watched didn't feel right for him. The old woman jumped a little when she heard him. Only then did she remember that there had been someone else with them. "It's all right, young man," she said with her squeaky voice. "I may be old, but I have enough strength to do what I want to." Ning nodded. "I see. Please do not hesitate to make me work if you feel like it," he said. The old woman might be old and have weak bones, but she was still an ether grandmaster. A simple enchantment would make her body stronger and more durable than a young man in his prime. This was something she could easily handle. For an hour, Ning watched the old woman stir and stir and stir. It wasn't just one cauldron too. She stirred both cauldrons. After an hour, she finally stopped stirring and put the lids on the cauldrons. Ning still looked at those cauldrons with fascination in his eyes. The process of making potions was nothing like the process of making pills. And yet somehow, these two things did virtually the same thing. "Do you not need to stir?" Ning asked. "No, now I need to let it boil and bring out the remaining stuff from those ingredients," the old woman said before bringing out a book from her cane. She saw Ning looking at her. "So, please," she said, asking him to turn around. Ning nodded and turned around. Then, he continued looking at the book from his back. "That's a list of potion requests, right?" he thought, looking at the filled pages. Just how many captains request for potions? He wondered. Potion to heal, a potion to fall asleep, a potion of poison, all sorts of requests were written on that list. One of those requests caught Ning's attention. The strongest poison, it wrote. "I knew it," he thought, with a sigh. Then, the woman flipped to the recent pages and crossed 2 potions from the list. How is she so confident? He wondered but didn't ask. Then, he saw another request in there that caught his eyes once again. "A potion to help you fall asleep," it wrote. That wasn't a very interesting request, but what was interesting was the person who had made the request. If the woman had indeed written it right, then the requester of this potion was the Lord of the Tower. Is that for someone else? Or is he having sleeping problems? Ning wondered. It can't be that my words got to him, right? He thought. Ning almost chuckled when he thought that. He waited for a while and the little girl said, "You can turn now." Ning turned around and smiled at her. He then looked at the cauldron that was bubbling so much that the lids were now starting to rattle. "You said you wanted to help, right, young man?" The old woman said. "Come help." Ning excitedly walked forward. "What do you need my help with?" he asked. The old lady brought out a clean white cloth that had spaces in between the threads so wide that it could nearly be called a net. Then, she brought out another white cloth with normal spaces. Finally, she brought out a gigantic bowl and placed the cloth on top of the bowl as a way to filter the liquid. "All right, help me slowly pour these all in here," the old woman's voice squeaked. "Yes, ma'am," Ning said and used his ether to slowly fly the cauldron over. He poured the contents onto the giant bowl which the old lady held from two sides so as to not let the contents spill away or the bowl tilt over. Once all the content was poured over, the old woman caught the first of the cloth with both her hands and pulled it out. All the solid materials in the liquid were filtered with this cloth that contained big holes. Then the minute powders and bits of the bigger ingredients that managed to pass through were captured by the finer cloth. The old woman had to sift through it a bit to let the remaining drops of liquid pass through, but that didn't take long. "Is that it?" Ning asked, looking at the pale green liquid remaining on the glass bowl. "Yes, but not quite," the old woman said. The little girl had already gone somewhere and brought out another large beaker of the sort, completely made up of glass. "What do you mean, not quite?" Ning asked with a confused look. "Help me pour this in that," the old woman said. Ning nodded and poured the bowl of liquid into the glass beaker the little girl was holding. He secretly enforced the beaker so as to not strain the little girl's ether, but it looked like that was unnecessary. The little girl was quite great at using ether to enforce her body already. The old woman took the beaker and put it on top of another stove before turning it on. She put the heat on low and covered the beaker with a lid except for a little space so that the steam could get out. "The mixture we just made can be used as a potion, but it's not as effective. Since I put a lot of water at the start, the mixture is very diluted at the moment. If we want it to have more effect, we have to evaporate it until the concentration is higher," the old woman said. Ning nodded as he listened to her. He had now understood how she made the potion. It was not different from how pills were made. You mix ingredients, have their attributes influence each other, and have a vessel for the final attribute. In a pill's case, it would be powder of the ingredients that were clumped up together. In the potion's case, it was the liquid the ingredients were cooked in. Ning nodded. He knew what he had to do to make potions. Now, all he needed to do was learn the recipes for each potion. "How many recipes do you have perfected right now?" Ning asked. The old woman hesitated a bit and said, "That's a family secret. So if possible, I will like to keep that to myself." Ning thought to himself, if I who didn't know about potions today, suddenly started making high-grade potions tomorrow, it will be suspicious, to say the least. So I need to somehow begin here before asking the system. But how do I get through to her, he wondered. Then, his eyes fell on little Helena. "Mrs. Ghani, would you mind sharing some recipes if I were to take in Helena as my student? I will teach her how to use ether and make her adept at it," he said. "No," the woman said resolutely. "I don't know if you mean well or not, but I cannot allow you to give my granddaughter hope. I know what hope is, it only leads to disappointment. I can understand what you are trying to say, Mrs. Ghani, but I promise you, I am not giving her false hope. If you let me, I can help her reach the peak of ether arts itself. In return, I only hope you share some recipes with me so I can start learning how to make potions as well," Ning said. "My mother used to tell me that I would become a great ether artist too. She told me if I eat the ether fruits day after day, I will become an amazing ether artist. Look at me now. I am barely an ether grandmaster. What's so great about a 220-year-old grandmaster, she asked. Ning thought for a moment and his eyes narrowed. "Did your parents tell you that those ether fruits could help you?" he asked. "Is that why you are so skeptical of everything?" The old woman hesitated a bit. "It's not just the ether fruits. I know nothing will work at all," she said. "What about this then?" Ning brought out a few ether ores to show to the old woman whose eyes trembled slightly at the sight of the ores. She knew how rare these ores were and were even more surprised at the fact how many Ning had managed to take out. I still don't think these will work," she said, lying to herself. "Oh," Ning said. Then he stored an ores and brought out a small glass vial with purple liquid in it. "Then how about this?" Saying that the old woman Gani was surprised would be like saying a living person breathed. There was nothing more obvious. Watching the purple liquid slosh around in the small vial, a color far deeper than the ores Ning had brought out just moments ago, Gani knew exactly what this was. And that only served to make her shock that much greater. How do you have that? She asked. Helena looked curiously as well. While she knew quite a lot, she was still a young child. Not to mention, ether liquids weren't something that was readily available for her to have seen them. Ning smiled, knowing that his next set of words was going to shock the old woman even more. I can make them. To his surprise, the old woman's expression changed, in the opposite direction of where he wanted it to go. She was actually starting to look suspicious more than surprised. Well, I should have expected that, Ning thought. Check it, Ning said, handing off the vial to the old woman. That little vial was merely 3 days' worth of ether from a random location in the ether forest. Adding in extra alpurite, and continuously moving the vial around to new locations with ether made it possible to gather it in just 3 days. Ning had managed to do this by tying these vials to ether beasts that could fly. At first, he had been worried that the vials would steal their ether, which would either kill them or turn them into normal beasts, in which case other ether beasts would kill them. He needn't have worried. The beast's ether in the gems wouldn't be so easily stolen. The old woman looked at the liquid vigilantly and opened the cork to take a look inside. She took a deep breath to see what the liquid smelled like, but there was no smell. However, it did have something else. An overwhelming amount of ether. With a single sniff, the old woman who had been stuck at the peak of Ether Grandmaster, advanced onto Ether Magister. Her body shuddered as she felt the ether in her body move through her. Oh dear Lord, she cried out as she nearly dropped the vial, but she caught herself. Then, Ning finally saw the surprise he had expected. This is real. The old woman shouted in her squeaky voice. That's what I said from the beginning, Ning said, with an I told you so expression on his face. But it's so hard to believe, the old woman said, trying to reel in her surprise. She put the stopper back and handed it back to Ning, but he shook his head. You keep it, he said. A thank you for teaching me about potions today. That should help you get to Ether King if you absorb it soon. I cannot take this, the old woman said. The vial was small and light, but it felt heavy in her hand. Take it, Ning said. Also, think about my offer. If you teach me how to make potions, I can help the little girl become a high-standing ether artist in the near future. I will leave you to think about it. I will return tomorrow to hear about your answer, Ning said and walked away without waiting to hear anything else. The old woman still couldn't say anything as the ether liquid had left her flabbergasted beyond belief. For a moment, she had forgotten about the potions brewing behind her, the other one that they had yet to take care of. Ether King, the old woman thought. The thought alone was able to make her feel like a young lady again. Just moments ago, she had been a grandmaster with no way to become an ether magister, and suddenly, she was looking at an opportunity to reach Ether King. The old woman's eyes twinkled with the thought of being able to become an Ether King. She was only broken out of her thoughts when her granddaughter asked, "What's that, Grandma?" Jasu Gani looked at her granddaughter and suddenly all thoughts about becoming an Ether King drifted away like a distant dream long forgotten. This is something for you to use once you are old enough, the old woman said. Her days were gone, but her granddaughter's days was yet to come. She would make sure to give to her granddaughter something her mother couldn't give to her, and she couldn't give to her son. Go throw out those wastes, the old woman pointed to the cloth with the used-up ingredients in them. Okay. The little girl jumped off the countertop and went to work. Ning returned back to the tower with a newfound excitement that he had thought he had lost. Fighting each and every time of the day had been boring and he certainly needed something to distract him from the mundaneness of the days coming up. So, when he learned about potions, he was naturally happy. He wanted to ask the system to tell him everything, but he decided not to right now. He wanted to research and find out on his own. As he walked into the tower, he saw groups of men rush past him at a hurried pace, wearing white robes and purple shirts. The battle force is being deployed, Ning thought. It was only one group, so he didn't think much of it, but before he got to the elevator, he saw 2 more. Now he was really curious as to what was happening. He wanted to stop one of the groups and ask them what was happening, but they seemed to be in a hurry, so he didn't do that. He didn't need to. There was someone in his squad that was great at gathering information and had likely known about it all along. So, he jumped into the elevator and went to find Alekor. What's going on outside? Ning asked Alekor, who seemed quite tensed himself. Alekor didn't even acknowledge that Ning had returned and instead just said, "Deaths." Alekor paced back and forth in the training room with Silvers sitting in the corner reading a book. By now, Ning knew that he couldn't read anything, but was genuinely trying to learn how to read. He ignored Silvers for the moment and looked back at Alekor. "Explain more, please. What do you mean by deaths? Where? How many?" "At least 24 on our side, more on the enemy's side," Alekor said, continuing to pace back and forth. "And?" Ning said, waiting for him to continue. Alekor finally stopped. "Do you remember about the rebellion I was talking about a week or so ago?" he asked. Ning tried to remember and asked, "The one in Embers we couldn't go to because of me?" "Yeah, that's the one. One of the terrorists that had joined the rebellion group was an ether saint, well known for his barbaric methods of fighting. I let the tower know before we left for Urandran, but it seems like they didn't quickly capitalize on that information, and only send squads with ether emperors and below. Now, people are dead," Alekor said and started walking around again. It seemed, he felt somehow responsible for the deaths. Ning got silent for a moment, thinking to himself while Silvers just shook his head. "We could have gone there, you know. When Captain was not sleeping. We could have gone there and had defeated that bastard. Maybe even I could have done that. But no, just because you were with us, we had to go to." Alekor stopped, realizing what he had been saying, and quickly turned to Ning. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say you were responsible for this. I was just," he didn't continue. He couldn't continue anything more and he would be punished for insolence. "Angry at the Lord?" Ning dared to finish his thoughts. Alekor looked with horror and even Silvers closed his book to look at Ning in shock. "What? It's not like you weren't thinking about it. Besides, the old man can't do anything to me." "Don't worry," Ning said. Oh, old man." Alekor nearly lost himself. He had maybe only heard Marasi call the Lord, old man, and that too had been when they were out doing missions. Ning dared to say so inside the tower. If someone had heard them, then. Ning looked around. "Where's Mercy?" he asked. "She went to wake the captain up," Silvers said from his sitting position. "Isn't she supposed to come out tomorrow?" Ning asked. "Yeah, but we can't wait, can we?" Alekor said. "Each second wasted is another one of our friends massacred. We need to go there as fast as we can, and we need a Supreme to open up a portal to the City of Embers." "Are the other Supremes perhaps sleeping too?" Ning asked and was met with a nod from Alekor. "What about the Lord? What is he doing?" Ning asked. "I don't know," Alekor said. "He must be in sleep or something, otherwise, he would surely help as well." Ning doubted that. The old man seemed out of his mind the last time he had seen him. He was not the dignified leader the tower deserved. "Can you guys not do that? I thought Captain said your skills were some of the best," Ning said. "I may be good in a lot of things, but gravity is something I'm not very good at. Even if I can open it, it only stays there for maybe 10 seconds before collapsing. That won't be enough time for the people to jump into the portal," Alekor said. Ning thought for a few moments and asked, "Then what about the other captains?" "They're like me too," he said. "They too can only open the portal for a little while, just enough for themselves. Either that or they cannot open portals at all. Why don't they just go and fight this terrorist then? They should be able to do that at least," Ning said. "They're already doing it," Silvers said from the ground. "The captains have already gone to fight, but they can't take their squad with them." "At the same time, it's not just about fighting against the terrorist," Alekor said. "It's about quelling a rebellion and healing our allies. We're lacking personnel on both fronts." Ning finally understood. It wasn't the fighting that was the problem, but rather the aid. "I see," he said and turned around. "Then let me help. I can create a portal." Alekor looked at him in surprise, and Silvers stood up too. "Can you really?" Alekor asked. "Yes," Ning said. "Now let's hurry." The three of them no longer bothered waiting for Mercy to go wake up her sister and went to the bottom floor. Alekor announced what was going to happen and started gathering the people who would be leaving. "Let me go check and see where I am to open a portal on that side," Ning said and teleported using his portal. When he arrived, he was a good 200 meters off the surface and looked down on a massive forest. He saw smokes billowing from a group of tents, and when his vision magnified, he could see white and purple clothes. This was the location. He slowly drifted down to reach a location where he could set up the portal, but suddenly a ball of fire came flying his way. Ning dodged and looked down, only to see people had gathered and were now attacking him. None of the attacks were lethal, but they were certainly annoying. "Stop attacking, I'm on your side," Ning said with a booming voice that everyone could hear from high above. "We can't trust you," the people down below said. "What? Why not? I'm even wearing the same. Oh, I forgot to wear the white clothes," Ning thought. "Stop. Stop." A voice came from the crowd as a girl walked forwards. "Taryn, is that you?" she asked. "Rachel?" he asked in surprise. He hadn't imagined he would find the girl in such a desolate place. Rachel told everyone who he was. As soon as they learned that he was under the Supreme Mirasi, they stopped showing any expression of anger and fear toward him. "I came to bring you help," Ning said, as he flew down to the crowd. The crowd of disorderly people, some wounded, some bandaged, some lacking sleep, and some clearly wanting to leave showed him a confused look. "Pardon, but what help did you bring, Brother Taryn?" Rachel asked, as he alone would likely not be a very good help. "Ah, my apologies," Ning said. "I came in advance to scout out the location. I will go bring the help now." A second later, a portal opened close to him and Ning walked inside. However, just before he was fully gone, his voice drifted over. "More people will come through. Please don't attack them," and then the portal vanished. The crowd looked even more confused. If a Supreme had said the same thing, they would have been beyond joyful. But what could her subordinate do? Suddenly, the portal reappeared, a black hole in space that connected to a location far away. Dirt and leaves drifted through the air, coming closer and closer to the portal. The women could feel their hair being pulled slightly, and the rest could feel various parts of their clothes move due to gravity. Then, a man stepped through. It was not the same man that had just left. This was a different man, wearing the uniform of the battle force. Behind him, a woman entered, wearing the same cloth. Then, another man entered, and another man, and another woman. One by one, men and women, all part of the battle force, entered the location of the war. The crowd looked in awe, and so did the newcomers as well. "Help is here," someone shouted, and soon everyone was cheering as well. Nearly 20 different squads, consisting of somewhere between 5 and 10 members, entered through the portal. Not a single one of them was above Ether Emperor, but the crowd didn't care. The newcomers weren't here to fight, they were here to help the wounded. Ning walked in last, along with Alekor, and watched the situation. The grim atmosphere had changed to a joyful one as everyone started getting help. Now that there were more resources, people didn't have to skimp out on medicines, bandages, or even beds. Ning looked at them with a smile and decided to go help some of the wounded. He was after all still a doctor. Before he did, Rachel appeared beside him. "I didn't know you were this strong," she said, greeting Alekor, who was beside him. She didn't recognize him, but anyone who could stand side by side with Ning here would likely be on the same status as him. "I was trying to hide during the test," Ning said with a smile. "Thank you for the help you brought," she said. "It might have been bad if we were attacked while in this trouble." "Don't worry, you won't," Alekor said from the side. "The captains should have already gone to quell the rebellion." "What will they do to the rebels?" Ning asked. Alekor shrugged. "They will capture them, that's all," he said. "We have no judicial permissions in the Republic of Embers, unlike Syrian Empire, so we will capture the rebels and leave the Republic to do what they want. That's all we can do after all. I hope the captains can defeat them without harming them much," Rachel said with a sad look. "Why do you look more worried about the enemy?" Ning asked. "Because they are not enemies," Rachel said, with a sigh. "Well, not entirely. They are just the common men fighting back against what they think is injustice," she said. "Injustice? Can you explain a little?" Ning asked. When Alekor tried to explain, Ning had to quickly stop him, telling him he didn't know much about the Republic itself. "It's like this, Brother Taryn," Alekor said from beside him. "When there were 12 minor kingdoms and dukedoms in this land after the fall of the original Syrian Empire, the constant war between these kingdoms for a chance to get the other kingdom raged these lands. At that time, the death and destruction the men had to suffer was not something any lesser than wars between mighty kingdoms. So, the common men joined together and fought against the oppression of the lesser kings and dukes," Alekor said. "They formed a rebellion at the time as well, the whole 12 states, together fighting against the constant war and oppression. And they won. Many died back then, the fire raged the entire republic, but the people rose from the ashes, men of embers, and named their newly formed democratic republic as such. When they won, they let the previous kings and monarchs keep their noble titles, as well as many others, but nothing more than that. They didn't want any more bloodshed, so they ignored them and formed their own government, formed by the common people. They thought their days of being looked at with a different light from the others was over, but it was not, Alekor said. As time passed on, peace came to republic and democracy remained. But that was all a lie, it turned out. Ning got curious. Was the government not really at the head of the republic, but the previous nobles? Ning asked. He felt like he understood where Alekor was going with this. Close, but not quite, Alekor said. The government was still at the head of the republic, but after such a long time, it was filled with nothing but the nobles. In essence, the nobles still controlled the common people, Alekor said. So, how did they find out just now? Ning asked. Back around a couple of centuries ago, a nobleman became the president of the Republic of Embers. The people at the time had no qualms, of course, as it was a democracy and anyone could do what they want. Then in his time in the presidency, the nobleman changed one single rule in the empire, Alekor said. Ning looked curiously, and Alekor answered. After the president, only people with great ether powers could run for the presidency. Ning thought for a moment, what could such a decree even do? Then, his eyes went wide. Alekor saw this and realized Ning understood this as well. Since only the noblemen had the treaty with the tower, they were the only ones who could become great in ether arts and thus become the president. Essentially, bringing the government back to the nobles' hands, Alekor said. And you agree with this? The tower should have seen through this, right? Ning asked. They did, of course, Alekor said. But the peace the tower had fought for the last millennia with the treaty would be destroyed in seconds if they let the tower's information be known. When that news spread, the whole world would be in turmoil, Alekor said. Rachel was seething in anger next to Ning. Ning wondered why that was the case, and if she faced any problems in the Xandria Empire, but now was not the time. But they should have known about that 2 years ago, right? When the apostle spread the techniques, Ning asked. That wouldn't give them any information about that, would it? Alekor said. He only spread the techniques, not the information about the tower's treaty. The knowledge that the tower was doing what it did is still in the dark from many places, Alekor said. Ning frowned. Damn, I didn't get to spread that bit of information, did I? He thought. He was only spreading the techniques and doing what he could to elevate the common masses during his time as the apostle. However, not a single time did he attack the tower. He didn't have any reason to. After the first confrontation in the Xandria capital, the tower had left him alone to do whatever he wanted. The next direct confrontation was with the Lord himself. There was no need to spread the information about the treaty. Hang on, why is this rebellion for then? Ning asked. He thought he understood what was going on, but that one piece of information threw him off entirely. Alekor sighed. Because the nobility of this republic got stupid. They let their power get to their head and thought that they could do whatever they wanted. Ning got curious as to what sort of fuck up the nobles had done. The current president, after seeing that there were people amongst the civilians that were rising fast in the republic, realized that soon they would no longer be able to keep the position of the president open for themselves. So, in a hurry, the current president made another decree, Alekor said. What sort of stupid decree did he make? Ning asked. He made a decree saying only people from the noble houses could become the president henceforth. Ning smacked his own face with his palm. So stupid, he said. I know, right, Alekor said, not being able to hide the disappointment himself. Ning shook his head as the thought of the stupid decree couldn't be taken out of his head so easily. The people protested? Ning asked. Of course, Alekor said. There's been protests for nearly 4 weeks now. And the president hasn't taken his decree back? Ning asked. He did, not long after, but the damage was done, Alekor said. You can't pass a decree yourself. You need the approval of the other members of the parliament in the government. Since the decree actually passed, the people realized that the top level of the government were all nobility and that there was no point in keeping them around. So, they keep protesting to disassemble the government entirely and rebuild a new one, Alekor said. And this rebellion? Ning asked. An offshoot of the protesters who got unnaturally angry and decided to attack the government directly. Drunk with their newfound powers, they don't want to see anything other than destruction, Alekor said. But I doubt they thought about it themselves, he said. What do you mean? Ning asked. Taskar, the terrorist the captains went to find, he is known to go around kingdoms and empires, to attack when it's most vulnerable. He rejoices in seeing the death of nobilities. So, I believe he might have been responsible for this rebellion from the start, and only just now came out to the open. I see, Ning said and put the name to his memories. All right, let me go see some patients. I will help however I can. While Alekor roamed around the place doing his own things, Ning went around the tents, helping with medical injuries however he could. For some, he helped stop blood from flowing out of the wound. For some, he helped bandage them. For some, he helped fix their dislodged bones. He also helped some with massages to ease their pain or heal them entirely. Little by little, he helped everyone that was wounded on the battlefield. Rachel walked behind him, with an absolute shock in her eyes. Not only was Ning incredible in his usage of ether as he easily produced bandages out of nothing, he was also a crazy good doctor. His medical skills were top-notch, at least in the first aid department. That made her feel a little bad about herself. Did she deserve to become a member of the battle force? All she had was a parasitic arm that swallowed everyone else's ether. Was that alone enough to qualify for this? Her thoughts quickly disappeared when she heard someone else rushing over. Alekor came up to them, more exactly just Ning, and said, "They're here." Ning looked to the distance, his vision zooming to impossible distance, and saw a group of people flying over. Within minutes, the captains arrived at their location, with many people restrained next to them. "There you go, the rebellion has been quelled," the female captain at the front said. "Thank you, captains," Alekor said, walking forward. Despite not being a captain, Alekor garnered the same respect from the other captains who nodded in greeting when they saw him. "Where's Taskar?" Alekor asked, searching for the terrorist. The captain's face frowned. "Escaped," she said, opened a portal mid-fight and ran away. The captains started settling down and the others handled the prisoners. In the meanwhile, Ning escaped to the side. He had the system give him information about this Taskar person, and soon he learned everything. He had a sea of information put into his mind, but he cared for none of it. He learned that Taskar enjoyed killing innocent people and hurting others for fun. That was all Ning needed to know. After getting Taskar's location, he vanished. When Ning reappeared, he arrived in the countryside close to the outskirts of the Republic of Ergor. Not very far from a desolate village was a forest that was currently fully dark. During the nighttime, there was not a shred of light. Not even the stars were visible on this cloudy night. Ning looked directly into the forest. He knew Taskar had appeared here and was hiding in there somewhere. With a single thought, Ning poured ether into his ear, exponentially expanding every single sound while enforcing his own eardrums. Sounds rang around him like explosions. The soft breeze sounded like a storm. His breathing sounded like a tornado sucking in everything. His heartbeats sounded like drums. The trees sounded like they were moving. And Taskar, he sounded like he was just in front of Ning. Ning looked in the direction of the sound and opened his ether sight. A purple haze filled his vision and soon the world became a shade of purple as well. And in that shade, he saw a bright, glowing purple figure trying to hide inside a massive tree. Ning dashed forward. He made some noise, but he was too far for Taskar to know anyone was there. Ning waved his hand when he got close enough and a massive gravitational pull appeared on the tree itself, ripping barks and branches from the tree to it. "What the hell?" A man shouted from inside the tree and jumped out. He had enforced his body, so while he tumbled through the ground, he wasn't hurt at all. He looked around him, but it was too dark to see anything. With a single thought, the broken-down tree started burning, giving light to the area, and finally, he saw Ning's face. And Ning saw his. The man was taller than Ning by at least a head and his shoulders were very wide as well. He looked like what Marasi would look if she was a male, but his body didn't seem to have as many muscles. His fair skin was also different from Marasi. His scraggly beard was long and unkempt. When Ning saw the mole on top of his lips, left to his nose, he was sure this was Taskar. For a man who was an ether saint, he looked like a homeless person. His clothes too looked like rags sewn together. The old man narrowed his eyes at Ning, wondering who he was. Due to Ning not wearing his Battle Force outfit, he couldn't be sure at all. "Who are you, kid?" he asked. He was going to get angry but realized that the person in front of him was likely as strong as him for being able to destroy the tree he was in like that. "Your death," Ning said and smirked. "How does that sound?" Taskar smirked too. "Sounds like you're looking to die," he said. "It does, doesn't it?" Ning asked, keeping his smirk. "Unfortunately for you, I can't die." Meaning, only you will have to die today. "Who are you really, kid?" Taskar asked. I don't remember meeting you. You did miss me by a bit. If the squad captains had caught you, then you would have met me, Ning said. But I guess those captains wouldn't keep you alive, so we might have never met. Shame, you even managed to escape, only to now die by my hand. Tasker's right hand trembled a bit, and Ning saw that he was hiding it in his rag of a sleeve. So he did get hurt. He didn't manage to leave so easily, Ning thought. I take it you're from the tower then. Tasker's face changed and he finally looked angry. You're looking at the next Lord of the Toe. Before Ning could finish speaking, the fire spread from Tasker's left hand, targeting Ning's body. Ning created a vacuum around his body, protecting himself from the attack. When the fire went away and Ning could see again, Tasker was missing. Ning looked around for a few moments and realized that he had run away to some other place. Follow him, Ning ordered his system, and he disappeared. When Ning reappeared, he was standing inside a barricaded room somewhere. It looked like an old school building, destroyed in a battle between two armies. There were chunks missing on the wall which were covered with desks and benches. Tasker was gasping for air where the teacher would stand, and when he turned left he saw Ning. He startled and tried to move away, slamming his back to the wall. Ah! How are you here? Tasker shouted. I told you, you will die today, Ning said and slowly walked forward. He didn't immediately attack Tasker as that was not his plan here. Tasker was known to enjoy torture, so Ning would show him what real torture felt like. One of the desks close to the walls moved and with a swing of Tasker's hands, it came flinging towards Ning. However, when it was about to touch him, a layer of reverse gravity stopped it, and instead flung it back towards the wall. At the same time, Tasker started creating another portal. Ning could stop the creation of the portal, but he let it be. Instead, he put his hands in front of him, and suddenly Tasker started choking. Ning was filling his lungs with water, while he tried to create the portal. Tasker now had to choose between whether using ether to protect himself or using ether to create the portal and running away. Tasker chose to flee. He could have chosen to stop Ning's water from drowning him in his lungs, but the water was already in there. Stopping him from making more would still drown him with what had already appeared. So, getting away and saving himself was the proper way. Thus, he crawled forward and jumped into the portal. When he appeared on the other side, he started coughing violently, even using ether to force out the water in his lungs. He coughed and coughed and coughed. Finally, after almost all the water in his lungs was gone, he opened his eyes, and saw a pair of shoes completely sprayed with his coughed-out water. The right foot moved and before he could prepare himself, it struck his face, sending him hurling away. Tasker felt his face burn with pain and he splashed in some water. He had appeared on the riverbank of one of the locations he had been to during the last 3 days and remembered it well enough to come here. Now, he was drowning in that same river. Ning looked with a serious face and saw a section of the river sink a little before jumping back to level, and even spraying a bit of water. He knew Tasker had opened a portal to another location. With a single thought sent to his system, Ning teleported again. When he reappeared, he stepped on wet carpet, likely water from the river that Tasker had pulled through the river. When he looked in front of him, he could see his horrified look of Tasker. When Ning saw this, he understood. This man was a coward. He was someone who used his strength to fight the weak, and whenever anyone remote strong showed up, he ran away. That was why he had no experience in fighting at all. Ning shook his head and his eyes shifted from Tasker to the other people in the white room. Ning saw almost a dozen different men and women standing around what looked like a meeting of some sort. He was curious now. Where exactly was he? Who are you? Someone shouted. Are you okay, brother Tasker? How did this man appear out of nowhere? The men and women in the room immediately started speaking and shouting. Some of them pulled out guns in defense, while some were getting their ether ready. Ning was sure that had he worn the Battle Force uniform, they would have mowed him down right now. What are you waiting for? Kill him, Tasker said. System, is anyone here possibly Innis? Before Ning could finish asking questions, attacks of many kinds appeared from the men and women who were in a circle. Some used guns, while some threw fire at him. Some tried to spear him through the heart with a metal rod, while some tried to create gravity to rip his body apart. Ning's body, which was protected with enchantment, a layer of ether, and finally reverse gravity working like a force field, could not be touched by any attacks at all. Ning gave an angry chuckle. I figured. He put out his hands in front of him as everyone continued attacking, and looked towards Tasker with what he assumed was an evil grin and snapped. Pop. Like a balloon filled to the brim with water and could not hold itself anymore, one of the men amongst the dozen or so popped into a haze of bloody gore. Chunks of meat and sprays of blood landed on everyone around them, who looked at the dead men with a horrified look. They didn't have to work too hard to look at him, for he was everywhere. In the white room that was bloody, only Ning stood with not a single drop of blood on him. Then, he snapped again. Pop, pop, pop. One after another, men and women alike burst like balloons, leaving sprays of red around the room. By the time Ning was done, not a single hint of white remained in the originally colorless room. Taskar, who was completely drenched in blood, looked with nothing but shock at Ning. He had come here to ask for help from his fellow brother and sisters who he had worked with. But now, he realized he had only brought death to them. Trembling hands tried to help him move back, but the slipperiness of the hot blood made it impossible. "It's your turn now, I guess," Ning said and walked forward. As he stepped, the blood and bones parted themselves to reveal the white marble that was originally there. Even then, he didn't completely step on the ground and hovered slightly on top with his reverse gravity. "Don't kill me," Taskar started shouting. Ning simply shook his head. "If you know you were going to die, just shut up and let me be done with it," he said. His single hand moved forward, and Taskar feared a snap, but Ning wasn't going to give him such an easy death. No, instead, water accumulated around Taskar, slowly picking him up. Taskar tried to move out of the bubble of water, but Ning's ether forced him there. Even when he tried to use his own ether, Ning's usage of it was far better and managed to keep Taskar there with no chance of escape. Then came the torture. Taskar was already having trouble breathing, but then he felt the temperature of the water increase. With fear in his eyes, he tried to open a portal, but with a single gesture, Ning cancelled the portal. Taskar put his hands on his mouth to not let himself breathe in the water, but the water was getting so hot that it became uncomfortable. At some point, the water started boiling, and Taskar enforced his body to survive it. For minutes on end, Ning kept Taskar floating in a ball of boiling water until he was forced to swallow the boiling water and burn his body from the inside out. Ning only let the man drop to the ground once he was dead. Ning didn't leave immediately. After learning that this was a group of terrorists' hiding place, he decided to help both the Xandria and the Odrain Empire get rid of them. Ning killed those that attacked him while incapacitating the ones that weren't aware of him. Once he was done, he opened a portal and said, "Enter." A moment later, a woman arrived and looked around in a horrified look at the bloody mess. "What happened here?" she asked for a moment before turning to Ning, who had brought her here. As soon as she saw Ning, she immediately greeted him with terror on her face. "It's good to see you again, Brother Ning," Fiona said. Ning nodded towards Fiona with a face that looked like his own. He was using ether to veil his actual face, not bothering to ask the system to change it, since it would be just for a while. "This is a terrorist headquarters at the border near Odrain. Go get some people to deal with his," Ning said. "Terrorists?" Fiona finally let go of the fear in her heart and understood what was happening. Ning gave her the exact location on a piece of paper and sent her back before she could ask anything about where he had been all this time. Once she was gone, he vanished too. Ning appeared back in the forest near the camp and walked back. He saw the group of rebels captured and kept at the center of the camp with some sort of makeshift prison using the wooden bars. There were captains in the area, talking about something, and it looked like a heated discussion. "We don't have the authority," one of the female captains said. "But they will be killed if we hand them to such an unstable government," another male captain said. "That's right, Shanna. We have to at least save them until they can get a fair trial. If we let them be judged now, then they're going to get executed," another female captain said. "I know," the original female captain said, "but that doesn't mean we can do what we want on foreign soil." After listening to a few of the back and forth, Ning understood the problem. These guys were worried that the rebels will be judged harshly for trying to attack the government. In a sense, they were terrorists who acted against the Republic, unlike the mostly peaceful protesters. Ning wasn't sure what to do with them either. He thought for a while and suggested, "Why don't we send them back to this country's authorities, but ask them to treat them properly?" The captains who were discussing amongst themselves turned to look at him. Some had an angry look on their face, while some were curious. "This is a matter between the captains, don't butt in," one of the men said. The others shook their heads and turned around to discuss once again. Ning looked at them in surprise. "Was I ignored because I'm not a captain?" he thought. That was it. Just because they didn't think of him on the same level as them, the captains ignored him. These bastards, Ning thought. There were about 10 squad captains here, and they were all ether saints. Yet, it seemed that not a single one of them knew how to check other people's ether rank. These guys are worse than Alekor, Ning thought. At least Alekor knew how to judge other people's ether rank. Ning sighed and took out a black glass orb. Inside the glass orb was a thin layer of glass separating water on one side, and alpurite on the other. Only Ning knew of it at the moment. Ning sent some ether into the glass and shattered the glass barrier in the center, mixing the water and alpurite immediately. Alekor was close and saw him bring that out. At first, he was scared, thinking Ning had brought some kind of poison because of what had just happened. However, once Ning turned it around, and showed a ring attached to its side, Alekor realized what it was. It was the ether-removing glass beads that had been passed along through the world. It was still a secret to most people, but he knew how to listen to secrets and knew that this ball was absorbing ether. Very soon, the crowd noticed that the ether in the area was shifting away, creating a zone of no ether. The captains were the first to notice and turned around. Ning ignored them and walked toward the prisoners before putting the bead on top of the wooden block. He then turned around to the other tired members of the battle force who were keeping guard. This bead will stop them from using ether arts soon. Once that happens, you guys can relax a little more, Ning said. The guards, being members of the battle force, knew what the beads were, even if they didn't know how they worked. Thank you, some of them said as they visibly relaxed. They had been forcing themselves to be alert and aware of everything happening around them, and their mental fatigue was reaching its peak. Ning nodded and turned around to the captains who were staring at him. You guys shouldn't refuse to listen to someone else's advice just because you have a higher rank. Makes you look small-minded and arrogant, Ning said. What did you say? Some of the captains got angry. Ning smiled as if mocking them. One of the captains couldn't contain his anger and was about to lash out when a voice boomed from above. Oh, someone wants to fight, huh? I guess I came at the right moment then? The captains immediately looked up in the air to see a flying Mirasi along with Mercy to her side. As soon as the captains saw Mirasi, they immediately humbled themselves and bowed, saying, We wouldn't dare, Lady Mirasi. Huh? Why not? Mirasi made a sad face. Come on, let's fight. Everyone stopped doing what they were doing and greeted Mirasi, who kept saying she wanted to fight. Ning started suspecting that she wasn't doing it for him at all. He had noticed her opening the portal and stepping through high in the air, but without the ability to magnify their vision as he did, they wouldn't be able to see her coming at all. Lady Mirasi, this is not a place to fight, one of the saints tried to talk her out of it. Oh, Mirasi said, but it looked like you were quite ready to fight my subordinate right now. Mercy was behind her sister, excited that she would get to fight some captains probably. The captains on the other hand turned to look at Ning, now completely surprised that he was a subordinate of a supreme. That made them shrink back into their flesh, hoping nobody noticed them anymore. Ning decided to ignore them. There was nothing he would gain by antagonizing these captains when they were already under pressure. Besides, he wasn't petty enough to want revenge just because they spoke a few words at him. Ning turned to look at Mirasi and Mercy and realized that they really were looking forward to the face. He had to stop himself from sighing in front of the entire crowd. He changed the subject, giving the captains some room to breathe by asking what they should do with the prisoners there. Mirasi thought for a moment and said, Send them back to their government. But they might get killed. The government is not so stable right now, Lady Mirasi. We should keep them. A host of people started speaking that made Mirasi scratch her head, not sure what to do. Alekor, she called. Yes, Captain, Alekor came from the side. Did anyone die? She asked. Quite a few, Captain, Alekor said. Do we know who killed them? She asked, looking at the people who couldn't have possibly gone past Ether Magister. There were a few of the rebels who managed to land some hits on us from what I hear, but those people should have died in the battle already. Other than them, it was mostly the terrorist named Taskar, Alekor said. He was the one responsible for the most deaths. I see, then take these prisoners to the authorities, but make sure they get punished for only what they did, not what they could have done, she said. Yes, Captain, Alekor nodded and went on to gather the prisoners. Some of you go with him. He can't handle them all together, Mirasi ordered the captains and a few of them stood out to go help. Once they were gone, Ning spoke with Mirasi for a few minutes, most of which was her just telling him how good of a job he did with opening a sustained portal. Ning smiled for a bit and said some words before excusing himself to go help some other patients. The injured had to stay around for a little longer before they were ready for spatial travel. Portals lurched a person in and out while going through it, so the doctors and medical experts wanted the injured to be as stable as possible before they were ready. They were planning to take these people to the hospital, but that too was far away, and with nobody really working these days due to the protests, the hospitals would have likely not been a good choice. So, they were all treated right then and there. Ning walked through the patients, giving some medicine, changing the bandages for some, and even helping some get back on their feet. "You have medical knowledge too?" Marasi asked with a surprised look on her face. "I was taught to be a doctor from a young age," Ning said. "But, fate had different plans." "Well, fate or not, you are really good at it. Even if you never joined the tower as a battle force personnel, you would have likely entered as medical personnel," Marasi said. Ning smiled at her and got back to work. Once Marasi left, he thought in surprise about how easily he was starting to lie. He remembered the days when he stuttered whenever he was about to lie. The Ning of those days were gone. Guess that's what happens when you live for 3,000 years, Ning thought to himself. Night fell soon, but bring lights were all around the area with batteries that were powered by ether itself. Some of the ether artists, who could create electrical energy, were helping recharge the batteries. Ning continued tending to the wounded, but the sound of cries was lowering quite a bit throughout the night. Come dawn, only a handful of people could not travel by the portals, rest were ready. Marasi opened the portals this time, and one by one, people entered. Ning watched as the tired people gained some energy and walked through the portal with thoughts of finally sleeping in soft beds. Once all the people that were leaving entered the portal, Marasi turned towards Ning and asked, "Are you not going?" Ning shook his head. "I have some task in the ether forest," he said. "Oh, what task?" Marasi asked curiously. Ning answered without hesitation. "I found potion making to my liking, so I'm thinking of taking it up as a hobby. I learned that it requires quite a few ingredients that are in majority found in the ether forest, so I am going to go there before returning back to the tower in a day," he said. "Oh, you found a hobby, huh?" Marasi said with a curious look. "All right, go. It's your free day today, anyway," she said. Ning thanked her and watched her leave through a portal as well. When the other captains return, they would likely help the remaining few people go back, so Ning didn't have to worry about them. Thus, he turned around and walked deep into the forest surrounding the camp. Once he was far away, he vanished. Ning walked through the ether forest and found the location where he had buried his bottles. He brought it out and looked at the content, only to realize that it could use a bit more time before it was fully done. Ning put the bottle into his storage and walked on. This place had become devoid of ether thanks to this bottle, so he would bury it at another place. Along the way, he found fruits and other items that would be considered ingredients for the potion. Ning had asked the system to inform him about each and every ingredient that could work, along with their properties. What he didn't let the system tell him were the recipes and methods to make the potions. Those he wanted to find on his own. He picked fruit from one tree, and cut bark from another. From another tree, he plucked some leaves, and in another, he tore off some flowers. Wherever his eyes went, he saw nothing but ingredients for potions. A normal person would look at this place and see a dark forest he needed to get out of. Ning looked at this place and saw a treasure trove untouched by humans for eons. Even without the recipes, Ning was sure he would be able to make many sorts of potions. In fact, he doubted he needed to kill ether beasts either. Ning knew that ether beasts could reproduce, but the speed at which they did was slow. With the Emperor of Xandria killing so many, their population was already down. So, Ning wanted to make recipes with only the plants so that people wouldn't go out hunting these beasts. After walking a little further away, to a location where ether was quite dense, he buried his bottle there. Then, he teleported to the next location. At this location as well, there was a bottle that he had buried. He had buried all the bottles at the same time, so it had been close to 2 years, or a single normal year since he had done this. When he uncovered this bottle, he was pleasantly surprised that this was very concentrated with ether and could no longer make any more. Ning placed the bottle into his storage and moved away. He gathered some more ingredients and buried another freshly made ether liquid solution in a place with more ether concentration. He kept on doing this all over the ether forest, gathering so many ingredients that he would have enough to make tons and tons of options. After a whole day and night of finding his ether bottles, and as many ingredients as he could, Ning returned back to his room in the tower. He looked at the time and realized that he only had about 5 hours of sleep time left. Well, that's something I guess, he thought, and after a quick shower, went to sleep. The alarm blared in the morning, waking him up with a drowsy head. He fought against the drowsiness and stood up. An hour later, he was back in the training room, fighting with Mercy again. Once the battle started, all of his sleepiness disappeared. Mercy had gone back to the closed cultivation that she called sleeping again. Ning wondered why they didn't simply use the word cultivation, but they likely didn't associate rising in ether ranks as growth for themselves. Also, ether was definitely worse than chi, so it was likely they didn't think so. After a session of fighting, a break to go eat some food and rest, and another session of fighting, Ning finally had the free time to go meet with the old woman Gani. So, as soon as he had the free time, he rushed out of the tower. After a couple of minutes of a walk later, he reached the old woman's house. Ning sighed once again, seeing the obviously horrid state of the house, and felt bad for the old woman. Still, he walked to the top of the stairs outside the house and knocked on the door. A minute or so later, Helena walked out in her normal strap-on pants and shirts. When she opened the door and saw that it was Ning, her eyes went wide and she immediately ran back into the house. At first, Ning was surprised. Was she scared of him? Was he not welcome anymore? However, when he heard, "Grandma, that uncle is here," being shouted throughout the house, he realized that she had simply gone back to let her grandma know of his arrival. He heard hurried footsteps as the old woman practically jumped down through the stairs and ran up to the front door. Ning smiled and thought that she had been using her advancement to Ether King quite well. However, when she came to the front, he realized that she hadn't advanced at all. "Young man," the old woman Gani squeaked at him. "Where the hell were you yesterday? I waited for you all day long to come back, but you never did." "Oh, you were waiting for me?" Ning asked with a bit of surprise. "I'm sorry. I had some work come up in the tower the other day, and had to spend the entire day yesterday out doing something." "I'm sorry that I made you wait for me for no reason," Ning said. "HMPH. That's fine. It's good that you are here now. You don't want to give this woman some heart problems, you see," she said, and turned around. She started walking away but stopped for a moment to turn around. "Why are you still standing there?" she asked in a worried tone. "Sorry, you didn't give me the permission to enter," Ning said. "Forget about permissions. Just walk in," the old woman said. "Oh," Ning started feeling happy. "Does that mean you've accepted my request to teach me about potions?" Yes, I have," the old woman said. "You can also teach Helena about ether arts. I might be old, but I've not yet gone senile to know what a great opportunity I have come across." Ning smiled and happily entered the house with Helena now even more curiously looking at him. "Are you going to be my teacher now?" she asked. "Yes, it seems so," Ning said with a smile. Helena's eyes widened. "Then I will be able to fight as good as you?" she asked. Not yet. After a few years, when you've become strong, then you will be able to fight as I can. Besides, you don't train in ether arts to fight. You train to be able to protect yourselves, your friends and families, and the other folks who need your help," Ning taught her. The girl looked with an amazing look and wondered if she should be writing it all down somewhere. Ning chuckled. "Wait until I formally start teaching you in a few weeks. For now, I will have to learn about potions myself," Ning said. Ning entered the soot-stained kitchen once more and nearly coughed when the spicy vapors entered his body. He was able to enforce his body enough so that he didn't need to violently cough it out, and instead just created enough air in his lungs to displace the vapor out of his nose. Right. Sit around for a few minutes. I'm concentrating on the potion," the old woman said. Ning sat on a chair by the table, and next to him sat Helena. While the old woman was checking the cauldron while preparing the next batch of ingredients, Ning decided to talk with Helena a bit. "How long do you have until your classes start again?" he asked. I think 3 weeks, the little girl said. "Are you looking forward to your classes, or do you like spending time with Grandma?" Ning asked. "I like helping Grandma," the girl said. "I don't like reading books." Ning chuckled. "I remember I didn't like books very well either, and I struggled so much because of that. You should study your books even if you hate them," Ning said. "I will try," the girl gave an impassive response. "What about your parents? Where are they?" Ning asked. "I don't know," Helena said. "Never met them." "Oh," Ning said sympathetically. "Have you stayed with Grandma forever?" "As long as I can remember," she said. "My son and his wife passed away in a landslide to the west." This child was only 4 years old at the time, so she doesn't remember much, Gani said. I see, Ning said. Ning asked a few more questions Helena to learn a bit more about her. If he was going to teach her, he needed to know her. As he talked, a question came to his mind and he turned around to ask the old woman. Mrs. Gani, why do you stay in such an old house? He asked. He had more adjectives to call the house with, but he kept himself from saying anything more just in case. This is my house. Where else am I supposed to stay? The old woman asked. I'm sure the tower will help you move to a different, better-looking house than this, Ning said. I will be honest, this house looks like it will come crashing down any second now. The old woman stopped what she was doing and sighed. I know. It's not very good looking and stands out in the neighborhood because of how bad it looks too, she said. But I have a special attachment to this house, she said. This was the house my son bought with his own money and used to live with his wife. He asked me to leave Ember and come live with him here when this little girl was born. I was so proud of my son. After he passed away, I thought many times of leaving this place, but I just can't bring myself to do so. There are too many memories I have made in this place to just leave it, she said. I see, Ning said. Then what about renovations? You can make sure it's not dangerous for you or Helena around here. I don't have the money for something like that, the old woman said. What I earn is barely enough to survive already. Oh, Ning looked confused. Does the tower not pay you? They do, but not enough for me to do what you tell me to do. They pay me to make the potions, but since they are not confident I won't make a mistake, they pay me what they think is enough. And they're not wrong, the old woman said, but it's also not easy to survive in the capital of the biggest empire in the entire world, is it? I'm sure once my potions become eligible for commercial sale, I will start earning money. I just wish to earn enough so that this little girl won't have to live through her childhood in poverty. The old woman was starting to tear up at this point, thinking about Helena's future. The little girl was looking down at her shirt, playing with it, not sure what else she was to do here. Don't worry, Mrs. Gani. Now that I am going to be her teacher, she won't have any problems in the future, Ning said. He wouldn't even have to do that if he was to be honest. All he needed to do was go tell the tower that he found a dual awakener and they would shower her with gifts so expensive that each one would cost more than this house alone. Enough nonsense from you, young man. Leave the future for the future, the old woman said, but she couldn't help but hope that he was telling the truth. She couldn't wait to see her daughter grow up to be a strong, confident lady. The old woman checked back at the cauldron. It's ready, she said and poured the finished potion into a jar before separating it into various vials. All right, come. I will teach you how potions are made. Ning walked up to the old lady Gani, standing next to her and looking down on the various ingredients she had laid in front of her. He knew the name of all of the ingredients, except for the ones that had been completely peeled, unshelled, or made powder off. For those, he could have to use his sense of touch, smell, and maybe even a little taste sometimes. Ning looked at the bone fragments on the platter of ingredients and gave a disapproving look, but the old woman Gani didn't see it, and neither did Ning want her to. To know how to make potions, you need to know ingredients first, the old woman said. Ning certainly didn't need much help in understanding the ingredients, but he let the woman explain anyway. A portion, as you have seen before, is made by boiling these ingredients. There is no exact recipe for the potions aside from the measurement of these very ingredients, the old woman said. She picked up a small flower and showed it to Ning. These ingredients will help me make a potion that soothes a person's spirit and helps them overcome insomnia, stress, trauma, nightmares, anxiety, and even helps you fight through sleep paralysis demons in most cases to get a gentle night of sleep. Ning nodded to her, thinking to himself that this was likely the potion that the Lord had ordered, the order of which he had seen in the small notebook she had taken out the other day. This flower in my hand is its main ingredient, she said. Ning looked at the flower in her hand and recognized it as a night crown. It had 5 white petals around a tiny green circle at the center. From the center, many tendrils of white strings fell down even below the petals themselves. The flower had been plucked from quite a bit away from the flower, but Ning knew that it was only the petals and white strings which held the materials that would inevitably be dissolved in the water. One could have a gentle sleep with just the night crown plants gathered around them with flowers blooming in them, but they had to be alive for that, and there had to be enough to fill the air with their essence. Ning knew that it was not really possible for everyone that wanted a good night of sleep to go around finding these flowers. A monarch or noble could certainly do so, but a normal civilian would have no choice but to buy potions if they ever wanted their nights to be sound. This is called a night crown flower. The old woman started explaining what Ning already knew. In fact, when the old woman ended, Ning realized that she didn't really know anything. She only knew that the flower was what made the humans fall asleep. She then put the flower down back onto the pile and brought out another one of the ingredients. This time, it was a pale blue-colored thick strings of some sort. Ning strained a bit to see what it was properly, and when he did, he realized exactly what it was. It's the tendon of a four-legged ether beast with branching horns, she said. Ning understood she meant to say antlers, but this world had no deers, so most of the words that would be common to most worlds were not available here. This tendon contains properties that help slow down a person's mind, making it easier for the other ingredients to influence it, she said. Next, she picked up a small piece of paper with about 4 pinches of powder on it. Ground up bones of the same beast as earlier. It helps make the blood circulation smoother and gives a calming sensation to the taker, she said. After that, she picked up a half-cut fruit that looked closer to a half-cut bulb of garlic more than anything. The old woman picked it up and started peeling it to reveal the slightly pinkish fruit on the inside. Lotus berry is just there to add a sweet flavor to the potion and can be ignored, but I do believe it is helpful in some other ways too. Although, I do not know as of yet, she said. Ning nodded, and in the back of his head recalled the entire information of lotus berry that was nearly 20 pages long if you were to write it down. When it all boiled down, the lotus berry was there to infuse vitamins into the potion, the lack of which might have been the cause of many of the disorders in a person's body that might have been causing them to lose sleep. All in all, the potion was starting to sound more like medicine than some magical elixir to Ning now. However, he knew that wasn't the only thing potions could do. There were some ingredients that could do things that could only be explained as being miraculous. One after another, the old woman explained the remaining 8 of the other ingredients and Ning acted like he was absorbing all of the information. Even if he didn't want to, he couldn't help but have his eidetic memory store everything that was happening for review in the future. Once the old woman was finished explaining all of the ingredients and what they did, she then went on to explain the portions of those ingredients. A single mature flower of night crown. A half bulb of peeled lotus berry. 1.5 meters long tendon of the deer-like ether beast. 40 grams of crushed bones of the deer-like ether beast. Roots, barks, eyes, fur, and the various other ingredients in front of Ning also had a portion assigned to them. Once it was all ready, the old woman turned to Ning. Once it is all ready and portioned, we dump it all into the water. She gestured for Ning to do it. So, he nodded and made the entire set of ingredients fall into the boiling water. All right, now we wait, the old woman said. In the meantime, I can teach you some more. Actually, Ning said. Before that, do you mind telling me what happened to the vial of ether I gave to you? I saw that you didn't use it at all. Of course, it's in my storage, the old woman said, and her face scrunched up in suspicions as she asked, you won't be taking it back, will you? Oh, no. Ning quickly explained himself. I was just wondering why you weren't taking it. You will rank up to Ether King, you know? Many people spend their entire life dreaming of reaching such a stage. But for you, it's in the palm of your hand. The old woman sighed and shook her head. I don't have such a dream. My only dream now is to rear this one child properly, the old woman said. I kept that ether you gave me, and I will give it to this girl when she's of age, the old woman said. Can't you just take it, Grandma? You won't have to struggle as much if you do, right? Helena asked from the side. The old woman said nothing aside from simply shaking her head. She diverted the topic back to the potions and started teaching Ning about the various ingredients and what they did. I am not an all-knowing potion maker, so if you want to learn it, you will have to experiment a lot of it for yourself, she said. Don't worry, Mrs. Ghani. I plan on spending all my free time for the next 3 years simply teaching your granddaughter and making potions, Ning said. That was the amount of time he had until Alexis fully disappeared from this world. The goddess was dying and Ning planned to fulfill her final wish by then. After nearly an hour of learning with the old woman regarding the various theories and recipes that were prepared by herself and her ancestors, it was finally time to refine the potion to just the liquid form. Once again, she took out a clean set of white cloths that she put over a large bowl and filtered the hot water. After that, she left the water to shimmer on the black cauldron again. Why do you use such an old cauldron? If you cannot afford new pots and pans, I can buy it for you, Ning suggested. Well, money is part of the issue, but it's more so my family tradition, she said. Ever since I was a little child, I've seen nothing but only these black cauldrons being used by my mother and grandmother. So, I am a little sentimental towards these. Yeah, Grandma really likes those cauldrons, Helena said from the side. One day, I accidentally broke one of them, and she scolded me so much that I felt like my ears were bleeding by the end of the day. That was because I had told you to be careful, and you didn't obey me, the old woman said before turning back to the task at hand. Ning put the yet to refine potion in the glass beaker that the old woman had brought out and let it boil away the excess water. While learning some more about potion making, Ning waited for the simmering liquid to condense. When he noticed it was a tenth of what it had been, he reckoned that this one beaker full of potion could be used for about 200 small vials. However, when he told the old woman that it was time to take it off the heat, she had simply said, "The customer has asked for something strong, so we will let it go for another 5 minutes." With such a low amount of liquid, in the next 5 minutes, the remaining liquid ended up being able to fill just 20 small vials. The old woman took out the vials she had prepared and slowly started pouring the potion into them. Each drop shimmered in yellow color as if liquid gold. The old woman enforced her entire body so as to not have a moment of slight shiver or unsteadiness when she poured it. Ning was quite impressed at how easily she poured the thick liquid into the 20 small bottles. She then packaged it up and handed it to Ning. Ning looked at the vials with a confused look and asked, "Why are you giving me this? You are going back to the tower, aren't you?" "That was requested by the Lord of the Tower, so give it back to him," she said. At the same time, she brought out multiple other vials and handed them to him as well, letting him know which one was for who. She wanted him to deliver everything to the tower for her. He chuckled a bit and accepted. He didn't really have to do anything after all. He simply had to hand over these bottles to the reception and those fellows would do the rest. "Come back tomorrow at this exact hour. I will have the ingredients for this same potion prepared for you tomorrow, and will test you on how much you learned today," she said. Ning nodded and thanked her. "You don't need to thank me," she said. "Just don't forget about your promise regarding my granddaughter. When do you think you will start teaching her?" Ning thought for a moment. He was planning to start a few weeks later, but it felt bad giving such hopes to a young kid like her and making her wait for so long. "Practical training will take a while since most of my time will be spent on learning about the potions," Ning said. "But I will try to prepare books on ether and how to use them. At least the beginner versions, so that when we start, she will be ready for the training," Ning said. "Good," the old woman said. "Also, if you can't make it, at least let me know beforehand. This little girl will give you our number." Ning nodded, thanked her again, and left the house. A few weeks passed by and Ning continuously went to the old woman's house to train his potion skills. By now, he knew quite a lot about potion making itself. If he were to guess, with his knowledge of the ingredients, he would be able to advance the potions to a higher level. However, he felt that it was still too early. For now, he needed to act as he had just started learning. Aside from that, he had also started teaching Helena. He gave her a strong absorption skill that he told her not to let anyone else know about. With that, she wouldn't even need the ether liquid that Ning was ready to give her. Ning was currently leaning next to a white wall, in an empty room with foams to dampen the sound all around the room. The room itself was quite large at around 20 by 20 meters, but that was only because they were in the basement of a large building. That was the only place Ning could find in the vicinity of where Helena was. Her grandmother didn't want him to take her far away, so he had found a free underground a block or so away from her. Helena was standing with her back to an adjacent wall, her black hair tied in twin tails beside her shoulders, and her hands outstretched as if focusing on something. She grunted with a thought and a small blob of water appeared in front of her. It had appeared around 2 meters away from her, and she struggled to keep it afloat. She had enough ether to easily do what she was doing, but she lacked practice, and thus her imagination was yet to be on point. The blob of water kept spinning around, bobbling to find a fixed shape as Helena focused her gaze on the small bucket that was 5 meters away from her. Now that she had created the water, she needed to push it away 3 more meters back. "Breathe," Ning said from the side, and she took a deep breath before focusing. The blob of water slowly moved forward, threatening to drop to the ground, until it really did. The water splashed on the ground, just a few steps away from the bucket, and Helena couldn't help but put on a very sad face. She had failed once again. "Hey, that's pretty good," Ning said. "You got to nearly 4 meters in just a day of training. When I was your age, it took me nearly a week to do what you did." Helena's frown twisted into a smile and she happily looked toward Ning. "Is that true, teacher?" she asked. Of course, Ning lied. He had started with creating water and moving water for Helena. He would go from water to stone to fire in the process of teaching her, using them to go through the different energies. He wanted to start with heat and fire, but teaching a young kid how to create fire didn't sound very safe. After Helena learned a little more, he would teach her more advanced and dangerous stuff. After training for a little longer, Helena managed to pour the water onto the bucket. When that happened, she nearly tired out from the fatigue. Ning took her back home and went back to the tower for some training of his own. Marasi was gone back to closed cultivation for a while now, and it didn't look like she would be coming out anything soon. From what he had heard, sometimes these Supremes went to sleep for more than 5 years at a time, doing nothing but eating, sleeping, and absorbing ether. Once his training with the group was over, he went back to the building, part of which he had bought for himself, and entered the second floor where he kept his potion-making equipment. Every single item in this room was made up of glasses, unlike the old woman's home, making this place look exactly like he was in a pharmaceutical lab or a place where they trained in chemistry. Ning started boiling some ingredients in a glass beaker to make a potion that was supposed to work as a pain relief medicine. He waited for the potion to be created and even made quite a condensed batch of it. He then took a deep breath while holding the potion in his hand. He knew for sure that this potion would definitely do something for his pain, or at least he hoped so. But he wasn't sure as he only understood the ingredients and not how they worked together. He let go of the breath he had been holding and closed his eyes to prepare. In a single gulp, he drank the entire vial of potion. As soon as he did, Ning created a knife in midair and made a long slice on the back of his hand. Immediately, he let go of the knife and clutched his left hand in pain. He waited for the pain relief to come, and it did, but along with it also came a sense of numbness that made him lose all feeling in his body. Ning couldn't feel a single sensation of touch, not of the floor, not of his clothes. He certainly couldn't feel the pain anymore. The potion had worked, but not like he wanted it to. He would have to change the recipe a little more. Now that his hand didn't hurt anymore, he stood up and waited to see how long it would take for this effect of the potion he drank to disappear. It took him a full 10 minutes before any feeling returned back to his body. Then, it took him another half an hour before every feeling in his body returned. And along came the pain. Heal it, Ning ordered the system, and in a flash of light, the wound vanished. I'm close, but not quite. A few more experiments and I should be able to make a pain relief potion that should last much longer than this. As such, his potion experiments were going relatively well.